Hello, I'll just set up my presentation here, but today we'll be talking about 4K live streaming, best practices, and how you can do it affordably will be the key focus of this presentation. So let's just start it up. So as was already mentioned, my name is Martin Sinclair. I am the CEO of vMix. And today we'll be talking about 4K best practices for multi-camera 4K live streaming and production, with an emphasis on affordable live streaming in 4K. So that's the key point I want to emphasize today. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is how you can do it affordably. It's actually quite amazing and surprising how affordable a lot of the equipment for 4K live streaming has become. 4K streaming is still very new. There aren't a lot of ways you can watch 4K streaming, but fortunately the equipment is there so you can be ready when your viewers are. And just to emphasize that point, what we're going to be talking about today is how you can do a multi-camera 4K live streaming production with all the equipment, including, importantly, the video cameras for under $20,000. So let's get started. So the key points we're going to be talking about today are formats and frame rates. What are we talking about with the technical formats when doing 4K live streaming? The cameras you need to do it. Capture and production, how you're going to bring all those cameras together with all of your other assets for your live stream and switch them all together and encode them for the internet. Then we'll cover the encoding and the bit rates needed for the best results with 4K. And then finally, we'll discuss streaming providers and CDNs, or content delivery networks, and what we recommend as a set of requirements when doing 4K live streaming. So first, let's get the formats and the frame rates out of the way. What standards are we talking about when referring to 4K in the live streaming world? So technically speaking, the resolution for 4K is known as 2160p, or 3,840 pixels wide by 2,160 pixels high. This is also known as Ultra HD. So there's actually two different 4K standards out there in the industry. This is the standard that is used for live streaming because all 4K televisions out there have this format on them. There's actually another 4K format out there you may have heard of called DCI 4K, and so this has 4,096 pixels wide with the same number of pixels high. But this is a digital cinema format that is not used for streaming. So when you're selecting resolutions in your equipment and in your cameras for live streaming, you'll want to choose the Ultra HD one. That's the one with 3,840 pixels wide. So for frame rates, it's all the standard frame rates you're probably familiar with when doing HD or standard definition productions, anywhere ranging from 25 all the way up to 60 frames a second. These are all available in 4K. There are even higher frame rates available in the future that they're ratifying the standards for 4K, up to 120 frames a second, but 60 is sort of the highest you'll find available on cameras today. So you pick and choose whatever frame rate you want. Because this is live streaming, you don't have to conform to any particular broadcast standard with regards to frame rates. And the good news is with about 4K is there is no longer any such thing as interlaced. So processing interlaced and ensuring compatibility of different cameras and devices can be a challenge. There's no interlaced with 4K. They're all progressive frame rates. And I've bolded there what we would consider the sweet spot for frames per second when streaming in 4K right now. 29.97 is the most compatible frame rate considering all the different viewing device options, the cameras, the equipment, and so on. So that's what we would recommend, but that's the range of frame rates that are commonly available for 4K, both on the cameras and the equipment you'll be live streaming with. And finally, encoding is an important topic to discuss. What compression or encoding format are you going to be using for your 4K live streams? Right now, you'll be using H.264. This is the most common format that is available now across all equipment and devices, especially important for the viewers. You know, what browsers do they have? What devices? What televisions do they have? H.264 is sort of universal across all of those devices that might be viewing your 4K live stream. In the future, there are two key formats that will have benefits that we'll talk about a little bit later, and they are HEVC, also known as H.265, and AV1. We'll talk about a little bit more about those in the encoding section. So we'll just jump right in now to the cameras that you could use for a 4K production. These are the affordable options that we've looked at. You have the Panasonic DVX200 that has a HDMI output up to 4K, 59.94 frames per second. That's only $4,000. So you can quickly see with 2 or 3 cameras how you can easily reach that budget of under $20,000. But there's even more affordable options out there. There's the Sony X70 that's now called the Z90, or Z90, I should say, here in the States. HDMI out up to 4K at 30 frames a second, or 29.97, and that's only $2,700. And then there's, of course, there are these options out there from Blackmagic Design, who have had 4K cameras for a long time now. You have the studio camera, which does the full 12G SDI output for around $2,000, including the lens. And then you have the micro studio camera, which has up to 30 frames a second for around $1,300 plus lens, so you're looking at about $1,600, $1,700 for that. So when picking a camera for 4K live streaming, the key consideration is how you're going to connect it to your production system. HDMI output seems to be the most common standard out there for 4K video over cables right now. SDI that supports 4K is still relatively new, with pretty much Blackmagic being the only manufacturer out there that offers cameras that can do 4K over SDI. The Panasonic and the Sony have SDI outputs as well, but they are pretty much limited to HD formats. So you have that versatility when buying those cameras. If you have HD productions, but you want to be able to do 4K, well, you can use SDI for HD and then use HDMI for 4K. So that's another cabling standard as well in the consumer space is HD-Base-T, which allows you to convert back and forth between SDI and HDMI for those long cable lengths, and it also supports 4K. The HD-Base-T standard uses a standard Category 6 cable, the same sort of cable you might use for a network. So they are the cameras that we've looked at for 4K. Now this is the key part of the production, and it's sort of a bit of an infomercial. As I mentioned, I work for vMix, and what we do is we do live streaming production software, and of course this software supports 4K. So the key thing is that 4K live streaming for multiple cameras can be done using a single PC. vMix 4K is a complete live streaming and production software tool for the PC. So it supports everything from switching your cameras to your graphics, your videos, and much more. And it has a built-in encoder. So everything you need to do a 4K live streaming, bar the PC and the cameras, is in this single piece of software. So on our website, we actually have recommended PC specifications you can find. Our website is vmix.com. We have PCs that are capable of doing HD multi-camera productions, 4K multi-camera productions, instant replay, all of those different requirements you might have for your live stream. You can find them there at our website. So for a 4K ready multi-camera production PC, you can build one, or you can contact a system builder or a reseller to build one for you to your specifications. You could find these for under $4,000. So if you factor in that system is going to do all of your production, it's going to do all of the encoding that you need, and the cameras, as we mentioned, are anywhere range from $4,000 under. You can do 3 $4,000 cameras plus the system, and you're still under the $20,000 mark to purchase things such as cabling, lighting, accessories like that. But you literally don't need anything else. You just need the cables, the cameras, and the PC, and the vMix software is what brings everything all together. So the key part of that PC when building it is the capture cards you might need that support 4K. For those that aren't familiar with these, capture cards are basically add-on cards for the computer that can accept the video signal that your cameras are sending, either HDMI or SDI. So there's a number of vendors out there that support 4K, such as from AJ, Blackmagic Design, and Magewell. And if you're interested, Magewell actually have a booth here in the exhibits hall, so you can talk to them after this presentation and ask them about the 4K options that they have available. But there's a lot of options out there now in the market. So basically, you just choose your cameras, choose whatever cabling you want, and buy multiple capture cards, depending on how many cameras you want to put together in your production. That's the production system all taken care of. And now we get into the nitty-gritty of the encoding and the bit rates you will need for 4K live streaming. As we mentioned, H.264 is what you're going to be using for encoding right now to do live streaming today. It's supported by all browsers across mobile and desktop devices. This is what most viewers are going to be able to watch 4K in. So this is what you'll want to be encoding with. Now, those with slow internet connections, should turn away now, because streaming 4K is bandwidth intensive. For 4K live streaming, you want to set your bit rate in your encoder, or in this case in vMix, anywhere from 13 megabits per second all the way up to 50 megabits per second. This is the recommended bandwidth range for high quality 4K streaming. And what you're going to choose within that range is a combination of how fast is the internet of your viewers and how fast is the action in your live stream. If you're streaming 4K sports, you're going to be looking somewhere in between 13 to 50. If you're just going to be having static shots, talking heads, PowerPoint presentations, you can get away with as low as 13 megabits per second. For comparison, Netflix, when they do 4K live streaming of their content, it ranges between 15 and 18 megabits per second. They have the advantage, though, of spending a lot of time encoding at that bit rate to the highest possible quality. So to achieve a similar quality to what they're targeting for live streaming, you're probably looking at around 20 to 30 megabits per second recommended. But as I said, it comes down to the content you're streaming and what you can expect your viewers to have access to as far as their own internet speeds are concerned. Now, as I mentioned, there are two future formats out there, HEVC and AV1, that will allow you to stream at lower bit rates. That's sort of the killer app of these future formats. It'll allow you to do the same quality at up to half the bandwidth of H.264. But there's still early stages yet of getting these standards adopted in all of the devices and televisions that your viewers might be using. As I mentioned, the HEVC and AV1. They both have pros and cons. HEVC is available now. AV1 is intended to be an open standard without any royalty or patent fees, both for the device manufacturers and the content creators. So that's one of those encoding formats to look out for in the next 12 months. So we're going to be looking now at streaming providers and content delivery networks. I'm going to look at the requirements and then what I personally would recommend right now for live 4K streaming. So the key requirements are, of course, they've got to support 4K. It's actually surprising. A lot of the name brands out there still haven't adopted 4K support for live streaming. One key example is Facebook. So if you're planning to stream today 4K to Facebook Live, you'll have to choose a different streaming provider to reach your audience. They still only support 720p. They're only just recently adopting 1080p. We do expect them to support 4K in the future, but we have no ETA for that at this stage. And of course, live transcoding is another key important requirement for 4K live streaming, because unless you can make sure everybody in your audience can watch the 4K live stream. For the optimal viewing experience, you're going to want a CDN that can transcode that live to HD and even to standard definition for watching on mobile devices. That way you cover the full gamut of viewers, the ones out there with 4K televisions, all the way down to those that might be watching your live stream on a tablet or an iPhone even. So live transcoding is a key requirement to fit that. And so our recommended 4K provider, the one we've had the most experience with right now with 4K live streaming, is YouTube Live. Not only is it a free service, it has built-in live transcoding, which is actually quite amazing. If you stream to them in 4K at 60 frames per second, at 50 megabits per second, in real time, it will automatically transcode to HD, to I think 3 different HD formats, another 3 different standard definition formats, and then a mobile format, all in real time and all for free. So that is our recommended provider if you're looking to find a CDN for 4K live streaming. But of course, there's a lot of different options out there in the enterprise space, and there's quite a few content delivery network providers out in the exhibit hall, so you could talk to them about their 4K support and what they make available. But the cheapest option out there is that supports it right now today is YouTube Live. And all of this is not theoretical. What I've told you today about the requirements when doing 4K live streaming and the equipment, we've done ourselves. And in fact, a few weeks ago, as part of our monthly live stream that we put together a show streamed to YouTube in full 4K. And this is just a quick diagram of all of the equipment that we used. The Panasonic DVX200, we threw in a Panasonic GH5 in there. I didn't mention that on the camera setup because it's more of a DSLR, but it supports HDMI output in 4K as well. We're putting these all into our capture and production PC, which was available for under $4,000. We used, for this example, a Magewell 4K capture card and a Yuan 4K capture card, and then we streamed everything at 13 megabits per second to YouTube Live. Now, we chose 13 against my own recommendations because that was the internet access that we had available. But we were it's a talking head talk show, not a lot of movement, not a lot of fast-paced action, so we were able to get away with that low bit rate. But that's probably the absolute minimum you'll be want to stream 4K at. And if you're interested in more information about how we put together our own 4K live streaming production on YouTube, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. So you can go to vmix.com and you can click our YouTube link and check out our YouTube channel where the live streaming vMix Fun Time Live Show, as we call it, and we go into all the details about how we put that together. So I have a couple of minutes left in this session if anybody has any questions about 4K live streaming in general. You can also catch us in our booth in the exhibits hall after this, and we're happy to answer your questions there as well. But if there's a couple of quick questions. Yes?
All right, hold on a second. Before we go on to the questions, I want to give a round of applause to Martin, who did a fantastic job, as always, making a complex simple. Great job. All right, first question. Name and question, please.
Hi, I'm Don. Can you talk a minute about NDI? Can you use NDI for the capture?
Yes, so vMix fully supports the NDI standard that NewTek pioneered. It's an IP standard for distributing video in everything from HD to 4K. 4K-wise, there aren't any cameras or converters on the market for NDI specifically for 4K, but there is a product out there called the Bird Dog Studio, which will convert a HDMI or SDI camera into NDI and then allow you to just use your standard network to distribute that back to your switcher. And then using the switcher, i.e. vMix, you can stream that to the web. And there's also a couple of HD camera options out there. But we fully expect, since NDI supports 4K, there'll be a lot of 4K options coming out over the next couple of years.